And with me in studio, we have two guests. And basically, we're just looking at what is cut out for the Jubilee government and what is expected. And one of the areas that we possibly would like to focus on and look at is the area of devolution. And devolution was one of those that are enshrined in the Constitution to bring equality, to bring resource distribution that is equal for all, but hasn't seemed to have worked that well. There are some who have said that the Constitution 2010 was an ambitious one and would take time for us to sort of grow into it, but it seems to be taking longer than expected. Steve, do you feel that the Constitution 2010 was, one, ambitious, and two, that we're taking too long to have it rolled out and take effect and work the way it should work?
No, you see, I don't think we were ambushed into this constitution, because the discussion to have a new constitution took over 20 years, to get us here. People were discussing and agreeing and sometimes disagreeing. Remember what happened in the first constitutional conference, the Ashpalgay team. There was even a walkout by some section of leaders, but ultimately we got here. I think the most important thing is we needed to disinherit the old mindset. I mean, even the Bible says you can't put new wine in old wineskin. You get? So we needed to have this. What is it that we disinherited from the past? The past, I mean, even going behind, I mean, back to the pre-independence period. Because you see, what happened at independence is that when the colonial administrators left this country, they left the reins of power in both judicial, executive, and also legislative powers lumped into the presidency. So then, and the idea was that the people who took over the reins of power also falsified that founding vision, which was to liberate Kenyans, to ensure that you promote the welfare and well-being of every Kenyan. But then they started using the same instruments of power used by the colonial administration to reward themselves and also to grow rich. And then power became an issue. The struggle for power became not a struggle for liberation of the people and protection and promotion of the interests of the masses, but rather a struggle for co-option into the class of privilege. So that even as we fast forward now, as we look at devolution, the struggle to lead the county government is not really a struggle for service, as is intended by the Constitution, but it's a struggle, again, to be co-opted in that privileged club of resource managers. So once we deal with that, we disinherit that past, then we can look at devolution in its proper context. One of my serious people who I admire have defined devolution, the Constitution in terms of governance, as that law that seeks to define, distribute, and constrain the use of state power. Why? So that power can be applied to the objectives for which it was invented and in the manner in which it was intended. Power was invented to promote a certain good, and that power itself ought to have been dispersed significantly. Now we have seen under Article 6 of the Constitution, power and resources being dispersed vertically, meaning between the two levels of government, the national government and the county government. The conversation we need to have on devolution is this. First of all, what is the role that the county governments are performing? Does that role match the 15% that has been allocated as the minimum, by the Constitution? So that if counties are performing fundamental roles or key roles, then there's a justification for amending the Constitution to increase that level, the level that goes the counties, to a certain level, not based on what the president thinks, so that he can tell Kenyans that, so you see, this year we released 30%. No. The money disbursed from the national government, national resources, to the counties must match the level of functions those counties are performing. What is it that they are performing, and what is the requisite amount? Okay. Then number two, when we go down to the counties, these county governors, have they strengthened public participation, because that creates opportunities for oversight? I really plead and pray that in this term, Uhuru should provide leadership, even and also inspiration to the counties. We have county public participation bills that have never been enacted up to now, Mr. Gitonga. So it means counties are being run based on rumors and guesswork, personal discretion and passion. You really don't know where the county is going. When they talk about public participation, it's a technical compliance issue. An advertisement is issued today. I have read in my own county, advertised calling for public participation a day to. I mean, okay, fine. How do I organize myself to be there tomorrow?
In a day.
Why don't you give each other Kenyans time to come and show Kenyans truly how you put my view in that government? Otherwise, what you are seeing is what we may call local capture, where a small elite in the county is doing what the national government is doing here at the national level, a small elite has taken county resources and they're running away with it, and they're using you as the resident to just sanitize the process.
And let me bring in Mudhomi here, because you bring out some valid points there. And Mudhomi, one of the challenges that we may have, and this might be because you cannot institutionalize it or put it in the constitution, is goodwill. Because when we look at the systems, when we look at the laws, when we look at the institutions, and we've already mentioned this, part of the thing that drives them is the goodwill. But that's something that is not written somewhere. You cannot force somebody to have goodwill. You cannot institutionalize it. Is that a conversation that maybe we need to be having as a nation in regards to how much goodwill is there on the political class to actually ensure that they preserve and protect the Constitution?
Maybe we shouldn't be talking of goodwill, but vigilance by the citizens. Our political class, just like politicians all over the world, will always and inevitably focus on their own aggrandizement and their own enrichment at the detriment of the masses. The tragedy we've had is instead of the citizens putting the political class to check, the citizens have just been sheepishly following the politicians, usually in tribal formations. But back to the issue of devolution. Devolution was actually meant to make the presidency an institution nobody will be interested in, and national government. But then you realize the old imperial presidency seems to reign even after all these interventions. And for me, one of the reasons we've gotten here is the government bureaucracy, together with parliament, have conspired to subvert the Constitution through the back door, and especially the 11th and 12th parliaments. What has been happening is, as my colleagues said about putting new wine in old wineskins, we have a Constitution that talks to devolution and to all these beautiful things, and then this Constitution is not self-implementing. It required Parliament to enact laws that would breathe life to it. But instead, what has been happening, the beneficiaries of the whole status quo, working with government bureaucracy, not necessarily even at the level of the presidency. Actually, this is one of the things the presidency actually needs itself to be educated as to what is going on. They enact laws. Actually, they reenact the old laws, and while they can't reenact the old laws, they rearrange things. I would give you good examples. Just yesterday, the High Court delivered a landmark ruling revolving around the Lake Basin Development Authority and the Council of Governors. And the main controversy there was the Lake Basin Development Authority, which is a national government entity, wanted to retain the old status and the old resources. Yet the question of water, sanitation, irrigation, and whatnot are devolved functions. We have another matter in the courts, and I'm just using those that I can authoritatively speak to, where the Water Management Resources Authority has again sponsored a water law of 2016. There is just a restatement of the old Water Act of the year 2001. And when you read through, the concern of the sponsors of the bill, which our parliament just passes mechanically, is to ensure no resources actually go to the counties. When you check the area of roads, what the national agencies, Kera, Kura, whatnot, National Highways Authority, what they have been doing is if they see that a certain class of roads, by way of example, say class C going downwards, should belong to counties, of course the Constitution would envision that the money would be taken to the counties to develop those roads. So what do? They work with the national government institutions to reclassify the roads. So in short, the point I'm making is part of the reason the presidency remains a huge attraction contrary to the vision of the Constitution is that the Constitution has been subverted, in my view, by people working within government bureaucracy and, of course, working sometimes in concert with business cartels. And at times with the politicians. Yes.
All right, and maybe as we now look at winding up, Steve, maybe what should be the first priority for the Jubilee government, the president and Jubilee government, once they're sworn in today?
Just to restate what I said, to prioritize compliance with the laws, at least at the bare minimum, what the laws ordained must be done, and also working on inclusion, then also attempting to deal, of course now we've seen the challenges of dealing with corruption, so that at least improve corruption perception index. Kenya's rating is significantly lowered. I think it's high at 145 out of 183. And then also compliance with basic human rights. Then once we get those 4 issues clear, then now we can talk about organized development. I would want to discourage this administration from using development as a tool for political domination. That is some of the just bad manners we need to disinherit. In Moi's time, you would get a road here and a hospital there based on your political leaning. The Constitution has moved us from there. Can then the president lead us in terms of disinheriting the old thought, appreciating the paradigm shift that governance and development is a natural consequence of leadership, so that there's nothing to celebrate really if you're working as per the expectation. There's a presumption, even as the way you're seated here as lawyers, that at least we will not mislead the country. You know, we'll put things, process them through legal lens, but present them in a manner that is beneficial. And there is nothing to celebrate if a lawyer reads the law. That's what he's been trained to do. So when the president is working, performing his functions, it should be as a matter of course.
And that's the bare minimum.
And that is the bare minimum. We really, really wish that let the technique of governance be open and accountable. Let him make, otherwise if he fails on that, I want to tell Kenyans, it is not beyond Kenyans, Mr. Gitonga, to innovate beyond this government. You know, because the 4 pillars that the Constitution rests upon, number 1, Midomi spoke to it, is public vigilance. You know, public vigilance means when the people feel frustrated, they can just go to court. You know, because number 2, we have an independent, robust, and functional judiciary. That's a very critical pillar. And of course, then number 3, of course, is the robustness of the constitutional framework itself. So, if the president wants to have a successful term and consolidate his legacy this time will not be marked on the level of infrastructural or superstructural development. His legacy will be marked at the very bare minimum compliance, because these are things that does not require really a lot of money. There's a scholar called Amartya Sen. He talks about development as rights, you know, development as freedom. Can you have freedom from hunger? You know, the unfreedoms. When people have, I don't mind living in a grass-thatched house or a mabati house, a tin house, as long as I have food. Don't tell me about superhighways, about irrigation that never works. If you're sinking so much money, let's say, by way of example, let's say Gulana, the irrigation scheme, so much billions that would have just used to import maize, for instance, if it was easier that way, from Uganda, wherever it may be found, and then people have food every day. You deal with, so I think before you go to that level of committing national resources, even externally borrowing, to push us to where you think we want to be, have you dealt with basic minimum compliance issues? If he gets that, we'll be good to go, and he'll be remembered as the president that animated the Constitution in the manner in which it was intended to be.
All right, Muthomi, your thoughts on where President Uhuru Kenyatta needs to begin?
Maybe he needs to begin by asking himself, what does he want his presidency remembered for? There are certain things, some good, some bad, we remember the Kibaki presidency for. There are certain things, some good, some bad, we remember the Moi presidency for. There are certain things, both good and bad, we recall his father's presidency for. And for me, the question that should be dominating his mind is, what does he want? 5 years is not a very long time. What does he want to be remembered for? For me, if I were to offer him suggestions, if he could help build a culture of rule of law, an area I think his first administration performed quite badly. If he could build a culture of respect for institutions, if he could do something about corruption, and we said what he needs to do if he is to stand any chance, and of course, most importantly, if there is something he could do about inclusion, all these things would be meaningless if any significant part of the country feel that they have been left out. Yes.
All right, and gentlemen, I think we would like to wind up right there. Basically, as we see images coming to us from Kasarani and also live on Kenyatta Avenue, we do know that it was a lockdown, basically in some of the roads, if you've not already left. But some of them are still open. I believe Mombasa Road is open right now, as the last report we received. And expected heads of states from the following countries. From Uganda, we're expecting Museveni, who's going to be coming. We're expecting the head of state from Djibouti, from Rwanda, Botswana, South Sudan, the Ethiopian Prime Minister. We have Gabon, Namibia, Somalia, Zambia, Benjamin Netanyahu from Israel, basically expected. And as you can see, Kasarani is currently filling up. We do know that there are some areas that possibly had not filled up. So as we basically say goodbye to Muthomi Thiankolu and Steve Ogolla, thank you for joining us this morning. Just to take a look at the legal proceeding that is expected this morning, and also politically speaking, what is expected ahead of the Jubilee government. And before we wind up the show, we've been in with Sharon Momanyi. Sharon, maybe just to look at some of the feedback that has been coming through via social media.